Hello again.
Hello again.
We're missing Ernie.
We are currently missing Ernie. Yep. But that's the good news is a quorum. Two's a quorum.
Well, good news is we don't have any motions.
Right.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, was Vince taking minutes?
I assumed he was because he's secretary. I sent him the text of my introductory remarks so that he can paste those in and have minutes very quickly.
Well, the only thing is that I don't remember having to say, hit the word, got it. And I don't know if you recorded it or not.
You did for this meeting, right?
Yeah, but I didn't for the last meeting.
Yeah, it usually records automatically in this account, but it should ask you. But yeah, as long as he knows who attended, then I think it's pretty easy to make minutes for that one.
Okay. Ernie knew this was Zoom, right? Only.
That's what we agreed to at the end of the last one, that
I think so.
we would do it that way for a while. Get as many people to be able to come as possible and have it be flexible. So,
Right.
Yeah. Do you want to just start and he can jump in when he gets
Yeah.
in?
I don't see why not.
Uh,
I hope he didn't think of going into town.
yeah, I doubt it. It was pretty clear.
Okay.
I can move to approve the agenda, but you're going to have to second it. I don't think we need to be so formal. So
I think so, but yes,
No.
I'll second. I'll second.
so that's sufficient, I'd say.
Okay.
We do have a few people from the public if there are any comments. Rob?
Is it a comment, Bob, or just saying hello?
Well, an important comment on saying hello, I guess.
Hello. Nice background, Bob.
Croatia.
Oh, nice.
Hmm.
All right. Well, if no public comments, we jump right into the drafting of the charter or the charge.
I assume we didn't have correspondence other than what's in the packet. I didn't.
I did not just what you sent in and the three things that I sent in. I
Okay.
didn't see anything additional.
Yeah. And just to give a little background to what I wrote, I was not, I was not trying to nail the charter down first try or anything. I was just trying to put down some things I thought would help the group navigate a charter or bring up questions that would be worth discussing in a charter, because I think the planning commission has left it up to us to sort of self-define The one thing I didn't put in there around membership, which I think, just thinking about it before the meeting, given that we're planning to be quite open about allowing participation and pretty much treating the members of the public that are here, free to speak whenever they want to and so forth, then I think attendance counts as membership in a sense. I mean, if you come to these regularly and are free to speak, then you're going to be almost equivalent to a member. So that's why I don't think we have to get too uptight about who the members are. That's the way I was thinking of it.
Jan, can I just go back to a different subject for a brief second?
Mm-hmm.
Only the two of us are. Who's taking minutes?
I am.
Oh, you are. Thank you for doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
Yep.
I think your charter was really well thought out. Really happy with that. So I can't imagine contributing anything more than that. That was really well done. So if any member of the public wants to, if anybody read it, anybody wants to add anything? Do we want to go over any of the finer points of it? I'll have to open my computer to do that, but I just thought it was really thoughtful.
Thank you. Yeah, it gives us a starting point. I guess the question would be then, if we like it, then I think the useful step would be to send it or get it back to the planning commission and say, not as a question, but just kind of as a statement, this is what we're working on from, and then if as part of the committee report for the next meeting, we could just have it in there and say, this is what we're working to, and take comments, to get their opinion.
Linda?
Hi, thank you. I just want to say, and you won't be surprised to hear this from me, I am a very strong advocate of renewable energy. And here's one resident's view, which is that I feel like the circumstances that we're in with regard to climate change and the need for us to stop burning stuff for our various activities, that places a big premium on clean electricity. And so I personally would like to see the town consider that the default position is that and solar is the most suitable renewable energy for Norwich, I think. But anyway, that the default position is that a solar project should be accepted until or unless it's proved to have some problem with it, some kind of siting issue. So I personally want to throw that out, and I'd like to have you guys consider that.
Okay. So Jan, do you want to go over your charter? Any of the points? Just so we don't, I don't like these, I'm always afraid that we write these documents.
Right.
And it's kind of like, the town plan. It's a living document. It should be reviewed. And if there's anything that we want to emphasize, or the one thing I wanted to do is make sure that we sort of have targets. And that's the only thing that, and again, I don't mean this to be critical, but the only thing is that somehow, actions as opposed to something that gives us direction. So
we can go through it and see, and maybe add one thing it doesn't have that we could add in terms of target would be schedule, any kind of time frame.
Yeah.
Okay, here's what we want to do, and the first stage is going to take 3 months or whatever. But if we just step through it, I was trying to really the overview is what I would call the charter in a sense, but encourage solar projects appropriate to Norwich. I mean, I think to Linda's point, yes, solar is desirable, but there has to be an appropriate to Norwich in there.
A balance.
Because that will balance things out, and that's character, topography, and so on. And then so I think that's the first bullet is a big piece of guide and encourage solar project siting. So we're encouraging solar project siting in places where it's appropriate. So that's a positive statement, not just a neutral statement. Create a collaborative process is a very specific chart. I think this group wants to, end up, to your point, one of the targets, one of the outputs is a process, best practices. So, here's what we're going to do when we get this kind of a project. We're going to have party status, and we're going to do this. We're going to publicize it this way. We're going to get public hearings. We're going to go walk the site. Whatever that process is, that helps with solar siting. And then the third bullet is really to say, to acknowledge the limitations of the planning commission, that we're going to do what the planning commission can do. We're not in a position to wave a magic wand and either get these things to happen or not happen. We have a pretty bounded set of tools.
So, Jan, can I just go back to what your second bullet? To me, the most important part of that sentence is using clear and defined siting criteria. I think it's really important, and how we turn that into an action, I think is going to be one of the most important things for us. Clear and defined siting criteria, and we experienced that there was not clear and defined siting criteria during the Upper Loveland. And I think that's where we might want to target, or not target, but just sort of say, we were saying forensically we wanted to go back and say what were some of the problems. And so I'm sorry, I'm not looking at you guys because I'm staring at this thing. This is so weird to have. I should have printed it out, but I don't want to print things out. So
yeah. No, so I agree. And I think to your point about targets and getting things done, it's going to be useful to focus and pick, of the 8 bullets that are there under subcommittee activities. If we try to do all 8 comprehensively, then it's going to take a year, and we're not going to, it's not going to be satisfying. So, bullet number 5 is discuss and clearly define criteria for some of those things listed. So we may want to either do 1, 2, 3, 4 and rank them, or somehow say we're going to do these 2 things first.
Right. And then going on to your working assumptions are great too. State laws and regulations, and that's why I submitted that into the packet, is that it's, even though it's only a proposed, but there are definitely state regulations that we have to stay on top of. And if it does get adopted, that's definitely something that has to be updated. So
I wonder, I mean, there are 2 categories of what you just said. One is knowledge, like if we're supposed to be this extended group, including the people that are attending, are supposed to be paying attention to this and knowledgeable. So if somebody says, hey, what's this amendment to the net metering laws coming through, we should be able to answer that.
Right.
That's one thing. The other is what are the things that actually drive change to the zoning regs or the bylaws or something. The fact that the net metering laws propose a 3-acre limit on forest cutting for, that's the proposal, even if that passed, doesn't necessarily mean we need to change the zoning regs, because it will be embodied in the state regs. But it may or it may not. But I think there are two things. We want to be informed, and we want to help others be informed. And that's the stuff about, creating reference materials and making them accessible. That's the knowledge piece.
Right.
And then there's some subset of that actually is, oh, we need to change the town plan because this is the new law of the land,
Right.
or something
Right.
like that.
Well, I mean, again, it goes, and again, this is all hypothetical because it hasn't been adopted yet, but it does have an effect on the preferred site letters. Absolutely has an impact on that. So, and going back to the situation that we had with Ridgeline protection map, and the fact that it is unclear, it's outdated. So I guess that's what my question is. At what point do we say an action needs to be taken in order to have, going back to, using clear and defined siting criteria? So that's, how do I say that? I guess I'm trying to think how it actually, what I want to know is how it actually becomes something that is less ambiguous.
So when you say it, you mean the citing criteria that we would use in the town plan and the regs to evaluate?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The term ambiguous is actually a really good one, because Vermont is notorious for having very ambiguous statutes. And it filters down into our regs. And that's why the DRB has been asking us to clean a lot of the language up in the regs, because there are some ambiguities that just need to be cleared up. And I think that's what created a lot of the consternation with the Upper Loveland project, because they would not have been arguing some of their points. And what the PUC wrote back was because they were ambiguous. It was not, and that's why I like what you said, using clear and defined site criteria is making it disambiguous. And currently, I think it is disambiguous, or no, it is. There are some ambiguities that just need to be cleared up.
Yeah. Well, in our, and it's, again, it's what's our regs versus the state regs, right? So that by the newly proposed state regs, the Upper Loveland Solar as proposed would not have passed. It would have been clearing too much land. And so, but that will be specific. If they passed something like that, or the things that are already there, you're not going to plop it on a wetland. They already moved it for a wetland, which was an A&R clearly defined criteria. You have to have 100-foot buffer from a wetland or so on.
Right.
So there are clearly defined state regs, and then there are clearly defined things that we need to be clearly defined in our regs. And
right.
I would be curious to understand. I think we're gonna come up with a list of questions as some of this, and then we'll have to figure out either who goes to find the answers, or who do we ask that has them.
Right.
But one question that comes to mind is, when you're doing preferred siting discussions in the planning commission say, how much is, how much do you use the town plan as your reference? Which seems to be emphasized in the way it's talked about, that you refer to the town plan. But how much do you use the zoning bylaws and not subdivision regs? No, but zoning bylaws. And it seems like the primary reference is the plan. And you don't spill into the zoning bylaws unless you had to. Like, there were references in some of those filings where it said, because we're looking for a definition of scenic and there isn't anything definitive in the town plan, we're going to dig deeper and go into the zoning bylaws. And so that was the way it was being stated. The town plan it's ambiguous, partly because it's general. You know, if you read the 12 or whatever state goals, it's not quite motherhood and apple pie, but it's, you know, support affordable housing and clean energy and economic growth, and, you know, it's, and wildlife and forests and so on. And so how do you write a town plan that is defined enough to be useful?
So my answer to that question would be based on, again, and I'm just because the Upper Loveland was my intro to looking at briefs by the PUC, it was clear that Norwich failed, and it did not protect, you know, the neighbors, and they, like I said, and I'm sorry I haven't taken the time to. I told you I was going to write down some of the main points, and I did send you that highlighted one. But one of the things that they pointed out is, you know, as far as the, you know, there are actions in the town plan, but I remember they were saying that, you know, for solar generation projects size from 15 to 500, the presumption is that Norwich meets the public utility definition of preferred site, notwithstanding. And that was one of the things that the PUC brought up. They said, they argued that in one part of the town plan, it actually says, sorry, should have had it up here. Towards the end, but they brought up the word notwithstanding. So here, in one part of the town plan, it actually says the plan calls PUC to issue certificates of public good between 15 and 500, based on the presumption that lands in Norwich meet the so-called preferred site, except in areas already mapped in ridgeline protection overlay and shoreline, blah, blah, blah. So then the other page says notwithstanding, and the PUC picked up on that language being contradictory to each other. So again, to me, a target is cleaning up the language and making sure that the language in those two paragraphs is very clear. So we go back to, we've been talking a lot about clearing up language.
Mm-hmm.
So
another example of that I remember from reading those comments, and we can go through them in more detail and pull them out, like you said. Right. One was the combination of development and steep slopes, and whether cutting trees counted as development, whether and then what was the definition of steep slope. So could you cut a tree on a 25% slope? Could you put an array pad on a 25% slope? But none of that was clearly defined. It was just stated with words like development, or development should be discouraged on a steep slope, with neither development nor steep slope being defined.
right, and then on, you know, going on a little bit farther on that is, again, going back to the Queechy test, and they made it clear that they showed an example where someone said, you know, it's not just ridge line protection. They actually identified and said that area must not be cut. That area cannot be developed. And they were very clear about the Queechy test that towns, if municipalities want to be part of this process, then they have to have more clear and disambiguous language. And currently, I think our language is disambiguous or ambiguous, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, a target would be clear and defined citing criteria is language, cleaning up language. And then I started identifying sites, like again, with the 2 paragraphs, where one is notwithstanding and one is except.
Yeah. Well, I do think to your second point, that's the key question. Do we be specific about sites? I mean, it is clear in some of that language that if you just say it can't go in scenic areas without defining scenic areas, you know, then you've got nothing. Then but if you say, you know, the view from that road facing that direction, or that farm that's right there on this address is scenic, then you've got teeth. But think about it. If you do a mapping exercise in town and you shade in very specifically preferred site, you know, this is allowed for solar, or this is scenic and this is ridgeline, very defined, and everything that's left is assumed to be preferred site. The more specific you get, the more specific will be the pushback, I think, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, and then take the proposal for them to say no more than 3 acres of for deforestation. That is when you're going to get very specific. It will be very clearly defined that not only would it be in ridgeline protection, but, you know, if based on the information right out of our town plan, 67% of the town is in forest. Oh, I'm sorry. Out of the 77% of town is forested. About 67% of the area identified as having solar potentially is currently under forest. So if the rules change, and those aren't our rules, those regulations are going to be very clearly defined. They will define the rules for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that goes back to the statement. We want to understand what we can do and what's the context that we're in that somebody else is dealing with, because ANR does a whole bunch of stuff, the PUC does a whole bunch of you know, these things, and the way that I put that, partly to not get into the whole climate change yes or no debate. I don't think that's necessary. That's why I put it under a working assumption or a given. There exists a strong societal pressure for renewable energy. So I think for good reason. But even if you didn't think there was a good reason to need renewable energy, it is a fact that there is a strong pressure. There are development pressures for PV in Norwich. So simply arguing against a climate emergency is a completely moot point. The fact is, there are solar developers who are going to be encouraged by state energy policy and all kinds of other things to try to put systems in Norwich. So that's a given. And that's why we need to you know, guide it in a way that's appropriate to Norwich.
Right.
But there's no reason for us to even pretend to do the state's job, to do anybody else's job for them, to do the state's job for them or whatever.
So the only thing, Linda, I'll come to you in a second. I don't want to miss my point. So what we got from the PUC and from all of our dealings with the Upper Loveland is that the state is now starting to encourage people to find alternate sites as opposed to deforesting. And it's not just coming from us. It is coming from, it is a whole new, I think, attitude that towns have the right, and towns should be starting to look at more going after parking lots, brownfields. If you read their proposal, it's not just about deforestation. They're saying, sure, we want solar out there, but start looking at parking lots, start looking at, encouraging new construction to, encourage people putting solar, any new commercial, there are a lot of things. I've been driving around Hartford, and noticing that somebody put a whole new condo complex up there and every building has solar panels on them. So the solar siting for us isn't just about deforestation or taking over ag land. Remember, I sent you that one thing that the state sent out about, instead of taking 100 acres of farmers' land and just putting solar panels right across the middle of it, there are states that are now putting it on the perimeter and working around and trying to find alternate ways, and just instead of having these massive rows everywhere. So the state is actually encouraging towns to actually start thinking outside of the box. This is not just us saying, let's not deforest the town or take away ag land. It's saying, let's start finding more appropriate places. And I think they're feeling the pressure. This is not just coming from Norwich. They're feeling the pressure across the state, where municipalities are saying, we want to start seeing these solar parks coming in a much more thoughtful way. Linda?
Thank you. And I have a point I wanted to make, but I want to add a comment to the point you just made, Chris, which is the Planning Commission could consider some kind of requirement for new construction to have its roof ready for solar. So that's something that you could consider. The point I wanted to make is to let you guys know another perhaps very mandate light from the state is from several years ago, and it's embedded in the appendices to the town plan. So I'm looking at that PDF that's online with the town website, and there's materials that came, they're headed energy data. It comes from Two Rivers Municipal Template Energy Data, and the last part of that highlights the a renewable generation target, and the Regional Planning Commission did it for every town, and it's basically based on a calculation that was done statewide, and then for the expectation of if the state met its 2050 goals of having 90% of our energy come from renewable sources, and that's not just electricity, but energy, that it would require X amount of megawatt hours. And then kind of region by region, it was like, okay, so the Two Rivers region, based on its population, ought to be generating this portion of that statewide total. And then based on population, Two Rivers gave every town its renewable energy target. So I want you guys to know about that. And that's basically, it's a range, but call it 20,000 megawatt hours, or megawatt hours, you're saying. So anyway, so you guys should I would suggest this is, to some degree, I have to admit, it's kind of an assignment from the state, but it's also, nobody's out there enforcing anything. Nobody's going to come after Norwich or Heartland or Thetford for not doing it. But on the other hand, I think in a broad policy sense, you ought to kind of accept it as at least a goal to be aiming towards. So that means within our borders, we should hope to install enough renewable energy to generate that much. From several years ago, we did the calculation that would be about 16 megawatts of solar.
Yeah, that's great. So Linda, the only thing I know to your point is that the PUC, or no, I'm sorry, not the PUC, but there were several things for under actions, which I really appreciated, that the planning commission would have say in, is when the new zoning administrator comes in, that there can be a code written for commercial buildings would have to install solar on their rooftops. I don't know about private. You might find that that could be a sticky wicket to enforce codes. The only other thing that I do know that was in the action plans for the zoning administrator is that it right here, it's under actions. Ensure that the ZA or their designee has the training and the resources to both enforce state and residential building energy standards, which would, it goes through the whole list. So I actually thought that was a great idea. And there doesn't seem to be any enforcement in this town for anybody to make sure that when they insulate or, put heat pumps, that's possible. But where I am not sure is legally how far you can push a homeowner to go in that direction. Does the law support a zoning administrator saying you have to comply with a code for insulation? And I don't think currently there is anything that says Norwich is going to send the zoning administrator out to make sure that somebody has complied with, R32 in the ceilings or 35 in the ceilings and R21 in the walls. So
Well, right now, we don't have building codes in Norwich, but it is clearly in the potential remand of the planning commission or the zoning regs to do building codes.
right. And so what to Linda's point about, I don't know if you can, just because the cost of solar and putting them on your roof is, becomes a much more of a financial burden, that I'm not quite sure if you can actually enforce that. But Linda, go ahead.
You make a very good point. There's a legislative study committee that is looking at building energy codes in Vermont, and I've been tracking it a little bit. And something that's important to know: there are residential energy codes that there's no real compliance. They're supposed to be followed. The compliance is basically all self-certification for the most part. And this study committee has also, though, identified that while there are residential energy codes, there is actually no residential building code for Vermont. So they've identified this as a major problem, and I think they hope to try to pursue that. But secondly, I just wanted to mention that there was a like maybe about a 2 or possibly 3-page document that our shared energy coordinator, and it was the actual staff person who was the first person to hold the position, had prepared. And I'd be happy to send that to you guys if you'd like to have it. It doesn't all relate to solar, but some of it does. So it might be useful for you to see that. And if you'd like it, just let me know.
Yeah, Send it along.
Yeah, I think that's why we have whatever it is, the bullet 2 under activities, understand and create reference materials for all this stuff, and we can talk separately about how to make it available through the website or compiled, or it's a link to where it already is on the Energy Committee's website. But we need those references, because we end up generating all these questions, and obviously if we are, then so are 10 other people, or the next person building who just wants to do the right thing but doesn't. And to Linda's point, you can make the roof ready for solar. That's a different requirement than you've got to spend the $20,000 or whatever it is to stick the PV on it, but don't do something that precludes it. Things like that. Because to one point that you see on all of these siting criteria and regs, like 5100, it's all for ground mounted things. Roof mounted is assumed to be the best way to do it. Oh yeah, if you can put it on your roof, you don't even have to, it's an easier hurdle, and it's clearly a preference. So whatever can be done to encourage that is good. I think to the other point, Linda, and to the specific siting question, if whether it's a mandate light or a responsibility of the town or so forth. So we have Norwich wants to be a good regional citizen, a good state citizen, and contribute its part. And 5 years from now, or whenever, a mandate light may turn into a stronger push. But the point is, if we can proactively move it along, if we can say, here are 5 preferred sites, and get things to happen, or at least make them easier to happen, then you take the pressure off the more contentious places. That's kind of the point. And that's kind of the somewhere, I can't remember, but we were talking, you can't just say no to everything, because there is such a pressure, for good reason, but from the state and from, region, and from developers who are, riding the state, and other reasons. You can't just stiff arm everyone out of Norwich. It's not responsible, and it's not going to work given the societal pressures. So can we, as part of the charter, help find good sites?
Excellent point. Jan, that is a fabulous point, because I think you're right. And Linda, you could probably help us with this question. I know we're somewhere around 200. I've been having fun with the EAN dashboard, and we are well advanced to most towns, in although Charlotte is beating us. They seem to beat us in everything, but we're up there. And I don't know if one way to look at it is to say, let's just say hypothetically, because I'm making these numbers up. If we're at, what was the goal, Linda? 20,000 or 20 kilowatts?
She said 16 megawatts of panels was the number I just heard you say. And obviously any of these we should just confirm and put in a list.
No. I'm talking, you had a total goal for the town. What was that? I thought I remember you saying something like 20,000 or 20. What was the target?
Yeah, sorry. Looking at the thing that came from Two Rivers. So it's the generation would be a range, and 20,000 megawatt hours is kind of in the middle of that.
Okay, so if it's 20,000 and we're at what right now?
Well, that's megawatt hours, which is different than installed capacity. So we're not at that.
Okay.
Let's just put it that way.
So, yeah, but so the question is, if we start saying to ourselves, if it is 20,000 megawatts that they want, and we're at X amount, I mean, somehow there's gotta be a way to figure out the math.
Oh, yeah, so I think the number that you said, Linda, which is a more useful way of putting it, which is the panel capacity. And so if you say 16 megawatts of panels, I think, a kilowatt of panels will make 1,000 kilowatt hours a year, roughly 1.2. So that 16 may turn into 20,000.
And we might be at something like 3, just through scattered residential solar.
Okay,
So 3, so rough numbers, 20% of a target, just to, so that we can understand, we're not at 90%, we're just trying to squeak in the last bit. We're not at 0. Rough numbers, 3 out of 16 or something. So we're at 20% of renewable energy targets. That's a 2030 number, Linda, or a 2050 number?
2050.
okay, so we've got 30 minus few years, 30 years to figure that out. So the question is, well, going back to your point, Jan, is to start identifying sites that the PUC is trying to encourage people. The unfortunate thing is we're such a bedroom community. We don't have a whole lot of parking lots to choose from, but the Montshire has got a pretty big parking lot. I'm not quite sure if they are willing to. There are, if we start taking an inventory, there's already a solar park on the brownfield that it used to be a gravel pit, which was a perfect location for a.
Where's that?
Right on Route 5. It used to be a gravel pit. It's right where you used to be the log cabin, and now it's the.
Okay, that's what I
e-bike.
wondered. I was gonna say there's a gravel pit back there. Is
It
that
was
already?
absolutely.
Does it have panels in it?
Oh, it's got tons of them.
The one that's behind the town well?
Yeah, isn't it 500 kilowatt? Linda?
Okay.
It is 500 kilowatts, and that's on property owned by the fire district.
Right. And so, there are, not that I know if, the Bogies or, Jeff Bogie, they're also, his pit is.
The gravel pit that is next door to that fire district property is owned by the Farrell family.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So,
and so if they are still still operating it and getting some gravel out of it, they would not want to do solar until they were done with that, or I don't know, figure out financially how that would work for them.
Right. But I just like the idea of what Jan is saying, is we start looking at percentages and saying, okay, if in 30 years, the land's not going to change. And if the proposal for the state comes through, we just lost 67% of our land to do, 3 acres. I don't know if 3 acres can cover a 500 kilowatt park or not.
I think the panels are about that big, but not for shading, and it depends on this.
Right.
The cover the slopes. Yeah.
To continue on the to meet that goal that we might wish to try to meet, I think it would be a good thing to do it. So 16 megawatts of installed solar, that would need about 160 acres, and Norwich has 28,416 acres. So in order to meet that goal, we would need around 0.5% of the town's total land area. And I would be happy to send that on to you guys via email so you could double check the math.
Wait a minute, Linda, go.
It's in the town plan. It's in the town plan, I believe.
No, I know.
Yeah.
That's I just wanted to confirm. So there's 22 plus or minus acres.
22. It's
22
160 acres of panels.
So
That
the
would,
town itself has 28,000.
28,000.
20, no, it's 22,000, unless the town plan is wrong. 20, oh, I'm sorry, Linda, it's I was reading the but. Yeah, okay, so,
But I think the point is that clearly the point to take from that is we need a very, very, very small fraction of land area. But the message then to take from that is you still have to find it and you have to pick it and you have to identify it.
exactly.
Because
And
that's
the
the
other-
nub.
The other thing I might add is at this stage, the utilities can change, but another consideration, you guys might go around and you might identify what you think is a perfect site. But if there is not a utility interconnection that's appropriate for the size project, solar project, it can't happen really, because if the utility interconnection is not already there, it's pretty expensive to get that utility interconnection there. And so you might think, hey, it'd be great to have a bunch of 150 kilowatt arrays around because they're relatively small and can fit right in. However, like I've talked to solar developers and they're not interested in doing that because the cost of doing a 150 kilowatt array is pretty much the same as doing a 500 kilowatt array. And so, but the utility interconnection available for 500 kilowatts are fewer. And so therefore, so like you have to understand that developing a solar project is like multiple tracks having to fall into place at the same time. And so it's utility interconnection, a willing landowner, neighbors who aren't going to fuss about it, financing, ultimate users, that kind of stuff. So it's a very complicated.
Mhm. Mhm.
So going back to, how do we look at this? So again, what I'm getting from the PUC is that they are starting to encourage to have towns find specific sites relative to parking lots, commercial buildings, and brownfields. And they are starting to discourage people from just clear cutting swaths of forests and taking over agricultural land. So to me, the obvious thing to do is find some inventory where there are already parking lots, which I don't think we have all that much of, except for the Monshire. And again, most of them are private, but I'm not quite sure. There's a lot of land around the Monshire, but that doesn't mean that we have the right to go and, I guess my question is, how does somebody approach a landowner and say, or do we don't really have that purview to do that, but we still can identify sites. So if the Monshire decided that they wanted to put, a 500 kilowatt park, I'm
Yeah.
at a loss of finding out. It's one thing to have an inventory and say, okay, these are the sites where if somebody said, we want to install a 500 kilowatt park, we would say, go for it, yay. But if you're on a ridge line and you're going to have to clear, X amount of trees, it's not going to happen. So
Yeah, you're going to end up needing to identify a considerably larger number of possible sites than you're going to end up with, right? So if you thought you need 160 acres or X number of sites, the exercise is going to have to assume that only 10% of them are going to come through or something, and you're going to have to identify more because all of the contingencies have to fall into place, and there's so many. I mean, there already are maps, the town plan has the maps of the three-phase power infrastructure and the substations and so forth. So there are clearly overlays like that exist. So, I think we have to be clear to the charter, the charter as it's stated says guide and encourage solar project siting in locations appropriate to Norwich. Okay, there's a word encourage in there, which is active. But if we just pictured a goal, to your point, Chris, a target that said, here's a map of Norwich, and you've got all these various overlays. Here's the power, here's the slopes, here's the forest, here's the, land use type, and so forth. And if you think you need 160 acres of actual array, you better identify 1,000 or 1,500 that have a prayer of having it's literally a Venn diagram of overlays and then that is with that map. And I guess this is the other side of the having influence over what happens in the town. With that map, Norwich becomes stronger in terms of saying no to things that are in the wrong place.
Right. And
you have to do both. You can't simply say no.
Right. But at the same time, Jan, I'm going to go back to the whole thing with Upper Loveland. And I totally believe that the protection of the ridge line is important. So for the same reason that, finding sites that would be more accommodating, I think we have as much responsibility to make sure that there are sites where solar parks shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
So it's our completely ambiguous ridgeline protection based on scenic roads that nobody seems to have any information on, because Rod just made it up. Who knows? There's no, unless I forgot which commission, was it the Historic or the Conservation Commission? Somebody actually did the scenic road inventory.
Yeah.
Created that, but we have yet to see that.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what made that official. And it seems to me that that is one of the target things we need to do is start saying, okay, these are sites that are great, but these are also sites that need to be protected.
Yeah. It's almost a carrot and stick thing. You're going to get more influence by doing both.
Yeah.
Yeah, and encourage, discourage, and neutral. So we kind of have three. We have a very detailed map that has three possibilities, or has two and then the leftover. And one is exclusion zones that very clearly say this is a ridgeline, this is a scenic, this is agriculture, this is, the historic district is called out in the current town plan. So there are exclusion zones. And then there are preferred, true preferred, like this really looks good. This has got the power connection. This is a parking lot. This is a gravel pit. This is a whatever. There's a true preferred. And then it's neutral. And you have those sort of three choices. And that seems to be a useful tool to kind of meet our commitments or meet our good citizen requirements, because it may come down to the fact that 5 years or 10 years from now, or 2049 or whatever, they're going to say, no, thou shalt find us 100 acres. And you'd be better off having done the work and do it thoughtfully for your town.
Linda, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, I'm a little confused by what I thought I heard you all saying, that the ridge line and the scenic areas are not mapped, because I'm looking right now at something online under the planning department, and there's maps, and there's Ridgeline District is number 5 there, and then it goes into A, B, and C, and there's scenic resources, and they're right there. So
Yeah,
I was-
unfortunately, Linda, they're not. They're drafts and they were never made official.
well, if you then perhaps if the what's shown on the map is satisfactory to you, then just make them official. Like,
If
so-
it were made official, Linda, then Upper Loveland would have never have made it. Because it wasn't made official.
If you combine if you combine it
scenic-
with if you combine it with clear and defined criteria,
Exactly.
because the town plan doesn't say thou shalt not put a PV in a ridge line.
Right.
It says it's default preferred if it's not ridge line, but if it's ridge line, you have to talk about it. You have to look at other criteria, you have to look at scenic. And so you would have to combine. I agree that we should start with the maps we have. And I talked to Kyle, the sort of acting zoning administrator we had, and he said, you know, the ridgeline map is pretty basic. It takes the actual ridgeline and then draws a 100-foot or whatever it is boundary buffer across along that ridge. And you know, it's very straightforward. But yeah, those are 2008 maps that still have the word draft on them. And so you could take those and scenic roads and, you know, take the ones that matter to this topic, look at them carefully again and see what needs to change, but you might as well start with them. And then you need to combine it with some more specific criteria.
Linda, what we discovered through the briefs that we read through Upper Loveland, the PUC, and again, it wasn't just Upper Loveland, I'm just using that as an example in Norwich. The PUC is clearly saying that towns have town plans, or some towns that don't have town plans, but the ones that do have town plans are not clear and concise. And they are encouraging people to get them cleared up. And so it was clear in the Upper Loveland briefs that we had to read through that Norwich didn't come close to passing the Queechy test. And it was the 2 words that unfortunately, the town plan, in one of the paragraphs, it says preferred sites notwithstanding, and then preferred sites was except in preferred. And they said, you know, which one are you arguing? So that's the kind of language they're clean it up. You know, what do you have? What do we even bother having it in the town plan to say that we have ridgeline protection, but we have an outdated map? Nobody knows what the scenic road map is. Nobody's ever seen a copy of. There's no copy of the scenic road inventory. Nobody has it. Rod has either eliminated it for us, but nobody get a hold of an official scenic.
Well, we don't. I mean, it still has draft on it. The PDF is the thing that counts as official, and it's got draft written on it.
Yeah.
But you know, I do think that we should take that on. And to your point, Chris, about kind of bite-sized morsels that we can digest, it would be useful to define a few specific ones to say, okay, and we know it's scenic and we know it's ridgeline, and maybe there are 2 or 3 others that are similar, and then say we're going to recommend updates if necessary to the maps, and we're going to be more defined about the criteria that relates to that. I mean, if you look in the zoning regs under ridgeline protection area, there's some pretty specific things about your buildings need to be off the ridge and where you put trees and what you leave a buffer of trees there. But you'd have to look through it carefully and say, what's still ambiguous and where would more definition be useful? Steep slopes with a percent, that says this is what you can do above 20%. This is what you can't. But I think that whole nugget would be, a hefty effort, but one at least that we could conceive of and get done in a reasonable amount of time.
Well, the DRB, that's one of the things that DRB, I don't know if you happen to notice that DRB, on their agenda was to look at someone who wants to develop on, not a solar, but
It was, Meeting House Hill.
on a ridge line. And I'm thinking, I'm not even sure why these people even bothered, because there's nothing they can do. There's no official ridge line. Again, what are they going to the DRB? DRB is going to have to give them a variance because there is no official map. So,
well, I think it's kind of a version, it's a real crude version of the Queechy test, right? If somebody was just unbelievably egregious or in your face,
right.
If they said, here is my enormous glass palace and I'm going to plant it right smack dab on the ridge top, and I'm going to cut all the trees for 2 acres, 3 acres around it, the DRB could say, no, you're not going to do that. And that probably would stand.
They can go through the appeal process because, again, anybody who wanted to take the town through the appeal process could go all the way because we don't have anything official.
But I agree, so there's an extreme that probably could get stopped, but there's an enormous gray area.
Right.
And
go ahead.
Well, I think that's what we're trying. You're not going to eliminate the gray area, but you want to shrink it, right? You want to say for reasonable people, they look at the guidelines and they try to do it. Right. They write like the Hennessy solar application. It goes through and it says, it's this far away from the property line and nobody can see it. And here's what we're doing. And the DRB one about on Meeting House, they do the same thing. Here's where it's going to be and here are the trees we are leaving. So it's a reasonable person looking at those guidelines as just that, guidelines to help them do the right thing. So there's some people will do that. And then there's this big gray area. And the gray area is the one where, less reasonable people will try to get away with anything they can. And total sleazeballs will stretch it as far as they can. And so we want to shrink the gray area.
Right. And the DRB's been asking us to do that. And that's the Planning Commission. The DRB has nothing to do with solar siting. But the same thing as the PUC is starting to say the same thing. If you can't pass the Queechy test, you have a problem. So they are trying to encourage municipalities to be more specific. And so here's an example. Let me make something up. I don't know, Linda, you guys live on New Boston Road, and there's that ridge all along there. I don't even know what it's called, but although I don't know that road well enough. Petrail Hill. Oh, that's where. Okay, Petrail Hill has a ridge line, and I'm assuming that Union Village Road is a scenic road. I know it. I'm almost positive because I've asked Rod and Phil that I thought Union Village Road was part of the scenic, even though there is a solar park that you can see from Union Village, but nonetheless, let's just say that Petrail Hill meets that criteria. And what the PUC is saying is you have to specify the land at Petrail Hill must not be a preferred site, or must not, I forgot how they said the language. Yeah. But
it had to be almost it was an address.
They actually want you to name hillsides or ridge lines. You can't just say ridge lines They
Mhm.
want you to actually identify and say, from this, and just because our regulations identified the ridgeline protection via roadside view, I still think it's kind of crazy to think, because I can't see Petrel Hill from Union Village, so I'm not quite sure how what road is. I can see Petrel, I can see that whole ridge line from Waterman, but Waterman's not necessarily on the scenic list. So they are encouraging people to be much more specific.
Mhm.
And that's what got the Queechy test going in the first place. You know,
Mhm.
and when we talk about, this actually goes back to the public outreach. And to me, I think it's a fair question to ask people, are there areas in Norwich and in the Conservation Commission, the Historical Society, other people who are involved in wanting to conserve certain areas? I think that's where our outreach really needs to be. Are there specific areas, besides just taking a topo map and basing a ridgeline protection based on a topo? Ask people in the town, what do you guys consider areas that you really want to protect, because from development and from solar siting. So
Mhm.
I'm saying both sides of the coin is finding areas that nobody wants. And again, this is me personally. The coming out of Norwich, we're right by the Van Armens, and seeing
Right.
all that area is just so beautiful. And the ridge line along there,
Right.
is that in the protection? I don't know, because it's so ambiguous. But it's, you start asking people in town, um, not that I think we should start another subcommittee of a subcommittee, but it's almost like it seems like it's sort of nestled in our job now to
Yeah, you're
public
asking,
outreach and find out what areas do we not want it, and what areas are a great potential. And I think if we
yeah,
really ask people,
you're trying to inventory the special places, the special views, that are, and that's kind of my point about Norwich's unique character, topography, and the feelings of the residents. So that clearly, the Van Orman farm there as you come down the hill, and 20 other things are going to be on the special places list. And somehow the challenge is that you're not allowed to say the whole town is that special, that because we have countervailing forces, we have a need to do something, and that's kind of my point. And again, we are not, my advice, we are not going to debate the urgency of climate change as part of this conversation. You simply acknowledge the fact that between the state plan and development pressure, there is, people are going to want sites in Norwich to build these things. It's the same with housing. There is a development pressure based on, here we are in the Upper Valley and here's where the jobs are. And there's a reason people want, and that's the whole, relates to the septic conversation and so forth. But there is that pressure, so that you cannot simply say, okay, Norwich, we want to do a special places, special views inventory to help with preferred siting mapping. And you go through the entire exercise and 97% of Norwich is on somebody's list of special places, then we haven't done our job.
Okay, Bob, before you say anything, I just want to use your background as a perfect example. I mean, you have that as a beautiful site. And if somebody who owns the land up on that ridge line said, we're going to clear cut that and put a solar park up there, I suspect you're not going to want to have that in your background. Or maybe you would, but I bet you there are some people who would argue that that wasn't an appropriate site. Go ahead, Bob.
I'll lower the hand. Anyways, it's a national park. So I guess it's already been protected.
There you go.
One thing I wonder, what I'm not knowledgeable about is whether or not there's a consideration for the economic impact of declaring something either suitable or unsuitable. If you rope off an area and say that's unsuitable for solar development, it's unsuitable for clear cutting or a variety of other things, but we're talking about solar. That's going to have a potential economic impact on that landowner. And so at what point does this perceived public good on one side outweigh the perceived public good on the other side,
Hmm.
especially when somebody's, the ability for, there are people who are citing solar arrays on their property because that's the only way they'll be able to afford to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
So
No,
I'm
I
gonna,
think it's a very good point, Bob, and I think I would like to get that's on the list of questions we need a
It's a
knowledgeable
consideration. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the extreme is you really encourage say this is the perfect place for a big solar field, and the property values of all the adjoining landowners go down by 30% or whatever, and then they get up in arms with the town about the fact that you just took 30% of their value away.
yeah, exactly.
The extreme version of this, and this is my experience was this 30 years ago, the solid waste board was citing the new line landfill for the Greater Upper Valley Solid Waste District. And we did a 2-step process of developing all of the siting criteria. Here are the soils, distance to airports, distance to rivers, all that stuff. And tried to get as much public comment as possible on the siting criteria. And it was like pulling teeth. Nobody wanted to talk about bland, generic siting criteria. Then we applied those criteria to the maps of the whole region and came out with the first thing that had made the first cut. This could be a landfill site. This could be a landfill site. My God, boy, you can get 100 people to come to a public hearing really quickly. But that is one of the issues. And clearly, putting a landfill next to your house is worse than putting a solar field next to your house. But there are big issues about takings. This is the legal word for it. It's a taking if if we made a zoning reg that said you can't build in a floodplain. Very, very definitive. Here's the 100-year floodplain map, and you cannot build a new house there. Well, then the person who's been sitting on this beautiful piece of land that's in the floodplain that was planning to build a house there, you just yanked a lot of value away from them. How do you deal with that in the context of making specific and defined zoning regs? Because the way we deal with it now is we're so ambiguous that nobody's worried because we didn't really tell them they couldn't build there. We just said it's discouraged, or should be done appropriately. As soon as you get specific, people are going to come out of the woodwork and they're going to say, wait a minute, to Bob's point, you are changing the value of my land.
So Bob, I'm going to but the PUC is doing it for us, Bob. The PUC isn't thinking economic value. They're looking at deforestation, and so the state is going to say, we don't care. So it's not just the town of Norwich. So the state wasn't thinking about the same thing you just brought up. Because if the state was actually worrying about somebody's personal ability to, get economy of scale out of their property, then they wouldn't be proposing this. So I'm not sure why the town of Norwich shouldn't be thinking the same thing. They're basically saying they don't. I mean, and again, they're going to if they make the ruling, I would say, it's a pretty serious consideration for the state to propose what you just said. So there are Vermont, so where I disagree with you in a sense that I hate this example is that, you know, somebody always comes up with this stupid platitude, the many for the few, or whatever that stupid platitude is. But Vermont relies so heavily on tourism. And if the state, of course, recognizes not just the climate problem, and they're trying to weigh out the difference of deforestation, is it a net loss, or is it, you know, they're doing, not me, but well above my pay grade. And I think it's above most humans' pay grade for us to actually know what the total sum is going to be of either deforestation and solar. You know, we're not going to know that for probably 100 years. None of us are going to know. No offense, but I don't think I'm going to be around for that long. But we won't know the difference. But the state is currently going to put the kibosh, or they're proposing to put the kibosh on that. And then you go back to the tourism and how this state relies on tourism. And ridgeline protection is a huge part of the Vermont vernacular. There's a reason why most municipalities have ridgeline protection. And that is so that when people come up here, they look at the Green Mountains. So I'm sorry, you know, my family owns a ton of forest land on ridgeline. And we've been really good about saying, yeah, we can't just tear it all down and put a development up, because we respect the fact that Vermont is actually beautiful and green. And I want to see that ridgeline protection, whether it's solar or somebody else's house. And, you know, right now there's a house on Bradley Hill that for some reason they gave them a waiver, and I got to stare at it. It's in the ridgeline protection. And so at some point, you know, everybody has to respect the fact that we're the Green Mountain States. And I get it. What the PUC is trying to say to all of us now is we need to balance both. We need to keep Vermont green. We need to keep the Green Mountains, but we've got to start looking for alternative sites, brown sites, parking lots, rooftops, other things. That's all they're saying. And we're going to have to make the effort to try and accommodate that. And I'm sorry if the economy of scale is that somebody can't clear cut a ridge line because it was more economic. They weren't allowed to cut it down anyway for a development. But they weren't supposed to.
If I can jump in, I wasn't taking a stand specifically. It was more a rhetorical question of do we on a local level, how much do we give consideration to the economic impact of the decisions? And especially if you're talking about a gray area, you know, is it 50% down the hillside of the ridgeline protected area, or is it in the valley? Is it near the peak but not impeding the view? You know, I'm just curious. When these maps are made, these areas are defined. If you're going to start talking about doing that, it's good, I think, to have the parameters that are going to be things are going to be measured against first.
Bob, that's what the PUC is encouraging towns to do, to learn how to pass the Queechy test. If there are lands that you want protected, make sure you can pass the Queechy test, and you have to be more specific. And that's what I was saying, that we needed outreach and find out if there's an inventory through the Conservation Commission, through the Bird Society. You know, the what is it called?
It's the Conservation Commission, but you're going to have
Conservation Commission,
the Trail Committee, which is a
the Trail
subcommittee
Committee,
conservation. because even Upper Loveland, there was the comment that said, wait a minute, this trail that goes through the town forest there counts as, that's part of the view.
Yeah.
So to get to your, I think it's as, especially since it's 5 of 8, to get to your point, Chris, about trying to come up with some targets and some actions and some specifics, you know, I think just coming out of this conversation with a starting point of an action that says we're going to take the maps that we have. It's certainly scenic and it's certainly ridgeline, and there are probably a couple other ones. And again, stay in our lane. We don't do wetlands. It is clear that ANR is responsible for wetlands. So we are not going to talk about wetlands. But so what are the other ones that we should have on the short list? And then we are going to do an exercise that generates feedback on, you know, say the scenic one is clearly what are the scenic roads? What are the, you know, what are the special views of Norwich and so on? We're going to generate feedback to that. And then we're going to take as a starting point the ridgeline, the definitions we already have, because there are some there. The zoning bylaws have, and they were quoted in some of the hearing stuff. Here is what we have for definitions about what you should do in a ridgeline and shouldn't do. So those are 2 starting points that we know are imperfect, but that's better than starting from scratch. So let's think about how to craft kind of an action plan for the next 2-3 months around that.
So, what I would like to know, and I believe if you look at, I don't have it up, on, Linda was looking at it. Oh, Linda, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up. But if somebody still has the web page for the plan, under the Planning Commission, I believe it was the Conservation Commission who actually created the inventory list of the scenic roads. So somehow, Jan, I don't know how, can we get, do we contact them, or do you?
I've talked to Craig Lane, who's the chair of the Conservation Commission, and they're, you know, as a very introductory opening thing, and everybody is very encouraged to follow up and talk. So, yeah, Linda,
That would be good.
I had another point I want to make, but in answer to that question, I believe it might be worth to dive into the history of the scenic resources map. I think Sarah Reeves would be a good person to contact. She was involved with that. I don't believe it was the Conservation Commission. I believe it was like a particular ad hoc committee or something that worked on that. So, and I think Sarah Reeves is a good contact. And the reason I had raised my hand was I simply wanted to ask if you guys were considering the actual enhanced energy planning, whether that was a topic that you wish to pursue. And if you do, then there's a it's pretty easy to find, but I'm happy to send you the link. There's guidance for municipal enhanced energy planning standards that outlines a whole range of things, some of which relate directly to energy, some of it is more zoning and land use stuff. But so if you guys don't already have that on your radar, please add it.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
And
we do. And that I have it on, it's one of the bullets there under activities, evaluate the possibility of creating an enhanced energy plan as a method to increase influence. And so it's a pretty, I've looked, I think, at the one you're talking about, Linda. It's a chunk of work.
It's very detailed, and it is, and it involves density planning, zoning, a lot, because it covers transportation and housing. It's very detailed.
Yeah,
But we
and
could
very few
certainly
towns have
get,
done it.
we could certainly get Peter Gregory or someone from Two Rivers. Two Rivers has a regional enhanced energy plan. They've done the work and they've met that bar. And that's what means that you get substantial deference or
Substantial
something
deference, right?
instead of due consideration. So your influence goes up a significant notch, but it would certainly be, Two Rivers would be a great resource to just say, okay, Peter, talk to us about the pros and cons, the amount of work, where, clearly some of the stuff we're talking about, a more detailed map, a detailed map that says both preferred, very specifically preferred and very specifically excluded, is part of that process, but it's a subset of a pretty big task.
Yeah, and there's not, I think I read somewhere there's not a single town that has passed muster to create an
Oh, really?
enhanced plan. I think there's only one town. The regional commissions do, but I have, from what I've read, that a lot of towns have a really tough time climbing that mountain. But go ahead, Linda.
Sorry, I just wanted to let you know I was on their page, and there's quite a few. So I'm trying to find, under
whose
list
name?
of towns that have received determination for Two Rivers, that includes Rochester, Thetford, Woodstock, Bethel, Braintree, Corinth, Fairleigh, Hartford, Stratford, and Tunbridge.
That all have enhanced energy plans?
Vermont municipalities with an affirmative determination of energy planning compliance pursuant to the,
That's enhanced energy.
That's not the enhanced energy plan.
Well, it may be, so that's a question. That's another
Good
question. Because clearly, to your point, it may not be what you meant by the super high threshold, but we're not on the list, and a lot of our neighbors are. So that means it can't be unachievable. and we have people to talk to who are nearby, who know the pros and cons and the ways to do it. And probably regional, the Two Rivers people would be able to pool the best knowledge anyway as a starting point for us.
Well, I don't know if Peter would be willing to join one of our meetings or for this.
He definitely would.
Well, and we've talked about that because we know that we wanted to talk to him have a million questions for the planning commission as a whole. But I wonder if we can nudge him for just a brief conversation with one of our solar siting and ask him about the enhanced, because if I remember correctly, when I was reading the PUC briefs, that an actual enhanced energy plan is very difficult to achieve. And as a matter of fact, I think Jeff's saying about that.
Linda's clearly reading something that's pertinent, but let's just follow up. Let's follow up. Is an affirmative determination, what are there 3 grades, and we're talking about different things, or what? But we should. Can
you reach out to Peter and ask him if maybe at our next meeting?
Yeah. We can have, I can start with kind of in writing or if we have specific questions, that's one thing. I don't know, how many evening meetings he likes to do, but we can certainly get some of the basics answered, and we should just keep a running list of questions. I'll pull out the ones that have come up in this conversation, but what do you think, Chris? What's your feeling relative to, how we step forward?
Two things that I would like to see as sort of our bullet of action is definitely to reach out. I think Sarah Reeves is a great. Sarah? Didn't you say Sarah Sarah Reeves, Linda? Sarah Reeves is a good one. Or, it does somewhere on the website, it does say what group created the inventory of scenic roads. So we can start there and get an official scenic roads and talk to the people who did it and ask them if they want to update it. Things have changed, and find out what the process is to make that very solidified. And yeah, this isn't ambiguous. This is the inventory for scenic roads in the town of Norwich. And then we've covered that, because then we haven't quite got to the ridgeline protection, which in the regulations, they kind of work side by side.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
you have to be careful, or you have to expand it a little bit to be scenic views, scenic areas. It's not just roads, because the Appalachian Trail, for example, you may be nowhere near a road, but if you plop something really ugly next to the Appalachian Trail, you're going to get in trouble.
Right.
So it's going to be some things about trails and views, not just roads.
So I guess here it is, Jan. And again, it's really new to me because I don't know how it actually works. So let's just say we are now thinking about this, and there are regulations that tie the ridgeline protection with this inventory. And I guess what I want to know is, what are the actual steps that we're going to have to take? We talked to let's just say hypothetically, it is the Conservation Commission, and they have this outdated inventory list. To me, the question is going to be, you and me and Ernie get the groups together and talk about it. And then obviously we make a recommendation to the whole planning commission. And I assume at that point that we would then take this before the select board and say, I guess I'm completely unaware of whether or not the select board has to approve scenic, or is that just strictly a planning commission thing that approves scenic something?
For it to have any teeth, and just the same as those maps, the scenic map and the ridgeline map, and the definitions of ridgeline protection area and the guidelines are in the zoning bylaws.
Right.
That means changing them is an amendment to zoning bylaws. That means we do the legwork, the subcommittee and whoever we can pull together does the legwork to propose amendments to the zoning bylaws that go through the planning commission approval first and the select board approval second, and it ain't official until the select board approves it.
So now let me ask you, if all we want to do is move it from being a draft to being official, is that technically an amendment? Or is that actually just saying, no, we just need to go before the select board and say, it's been in a draft file for the last more than 10 years. It was dated 2008.
Pushing 15.
15 years ago, they only created a draft. What I want to know is, if we let's ask the select board what it would take to make the current draft official, or do we want to go into the sense of broadening it, or talking to people and saying, are there areas that we want to add?
I think we need to look first, right? Because if we look and without too much digging, we figure out that we're going to want to change something.
Right.
It's not, we don't want to just remove the word draft. Then we don't want to have gone through any motions with the select board asking them a question, how easy would it be to take draft off? So I think we need to do the first set of digging to the scenic inventory, the ridgeline map, and the regulation, the bylaws that go along with both of those. And we can use the hearing notes from Upper Loveland are very handy. Even the DRB one, the two things that are up at the DRB on Thursday One of them over in Jericho there is in the scenic area. It's
Okay.
in a scenic area, and then the other one is Meeting House Hill on the ridge. And so, and you can read it in their applications how they talk to that. But I think we need to sort of compile that subset of the preferred siting conversation and say, step one, we saw a big gap in a recent project that and we're going to try and work on that ambiguity piece. And it's exactly what are the boundaries of Ridgeline and what are the guidelines relating to solar. I mean, depending, the more we bound it, the more we're capable of succeeding. So, you know, what's the map and what are the boundaries, and then what are the rules
Right.
or PV things within that. I mean, to a certain degree, you're not going to get three-phase infrastructure at the top of too many ridges. And so, you know, that's part of the mapping exercise to say, all right, if we're talking about PV, we're not just trying to rewrite everything there is to do with ridges and scenic. We're on solar siting. We may be able to bound this and not have it be too big a task.
So what do you think about the idea of reaching out to, reaching out to the Conservation and the Historical Society and asking them to join our meeting for an informal conversation about this? To me, that's an action that I think is very warranted. And any other group that deals with resources in Norwich, and that's why I was thinking, it's not the Botanical Society, it's the the Audubon. There's an Audubon group.
Oh, is there?
Plenty of
Yeah.
people who I think are going to be very interested in what areas that they think are, should be protected, or maybe they've been out bird watching and they realize it'd be a great place for a solar park. I don't know. But I would like to try and encourage some of these groups to actually sit down and have those, come to a session like this, and which is part of your outreach.
And we don't have to, the point is, we're not gonna, it's not like one meeting and you're done with this. You're gonna have a conversation, and you're gonna get a few people that come, and they're gonna say, oh, you gotta talk to so-and-so, and you gotta pull in this, and it's gonna take a few iterations. But if we do some outreach, and clearly Conservation Commission, they are the overview for the trails people, but it's probably separate. Historical Society will have a certain thing, and while you're talking to them, we say, oh, and anybody else, and then do a listserv thing before the meeting that says this is the time. We are
great idea
in the very early stages, the very preliminary stages of looking at our ridgeline and scenic maps and zoning bylaws associated with them to better define PV preferred sites. And we're looking for public input on those topics, and pick a date. So if we just looking at meeting dates, if we stick with, for the sake of consistency, the Tuesday after the select board regular meeting, then that means we're October 17th, the next this PC meeting. So we have the PC meeting is, the next one is the 10th of October, Tuesday, and then that next Tuesday is the 17th. So that's far enough in the future so that we could do some outreach talk to some people individually, do a listserv thing, wrap it around, and you need to do it again closer to the time. But let's come up with a statement that we can use to beat the bushes a little bit.
Yeah.
And get people to come to a meeting on October 17th that tries to start this conversation in earnest.
Yeah, and the only thing I know this, we're doing this specific to solar siting, but I don't want to mislead anybody in that these are the whole scenic thing is tied into the regulations, so it affects development. It's not just solar siting. It is going to affect development. Once you codify that inventory list, the DRB, in a way, get somebody like Jack Candon or somebody on the DRB who is going to recognize that inventory list, has a lot more teeth on DRB meetings than solar siting meetings.
And I think, to put it another way, I agree completely. To put it another way, once you touch these things, you should do whatever you can. Once you open up and you're going to go through this process of public input, planning commission discussions, select board discussions, if the DRB has a burning desire for you to clarify this ridiculous ambiguity in the scenic bylaw, we should know about that, and we should include it in the conversation, even if it has nothing to do with PV, because we're going through all the trouble of touching the thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, in a way, it might be nice to get somebody on the DRB.
Yeah.
And did we ever find that list of the requests from the DRB? Was that, I know that.
Yeah, there definitely is a list of, and part of it's in the minutes when they met, and then there's another couple files and documents I saw in the file. So we can get more of that. And Arlene Rotman was also brought up as somebody who was very involved in the earlier, in that time of the DRB. And then the current DRB is Patrick. I talked to him recently. So
yeah, I mean, just again,
think,
from their perspective, of course they have nothing to do with solar siting, but exactly, I don't need to repeat what you just said, but I think we just need to be sensitive. It's funny when you were kind of going on about listserv posts. I was like, you should have, it's on tape. You should just say that. I think you said it really well.
Yeah, well, I'll need to get the notes anyway, but I think that's the point. It's not everything. It's ridgeline and scenic, and then I don't know, and that's one of the things we need to do is pull up the zoning bylaws with that lens in mind and say, okay, what does it say about ridgeline protection areas? What does it say about scenic? And then we just concentrate on that for round one here. We know it's a hole. We know it's needed for solar, and it's going to have other benefits. So let's just focus on that. And I think what we can do is, I'll do the minutes, and then you have your notes, and we'll do round one of kind of talking to people. Then we're going to have a planning commission meeting on that, on the 10th. So then we'll put it on the agenda for that as part of our subcommittee report. So that means 3 weeks from now, we'll have a conversation. And so between talking to people, I'll talk to Peter, we'll talk to, at least 3 or 4 of these groups, preliminary, we'll beat the bushes maybe with certainly a listserv post in that week after. But if it's on the agenda in the planning commission, and then on the agenda for this group, after, then I think that'll be enough. That'll be enough activity for the next month. We don't.
I think that's great. Great idea. So are you, not that I would have put everything on you, but it sounds like you've already talked to some people at both the historical, we've talked, Nancy's obviously shown a great deal of interest. Nancy is just a fantastic.
Well, Nancy, if you
Nancy's fabulous.
Yeah, so they have specifically on their next meeting is the 28th of September.
That would be a good thing for us to.
And so if you can do that, if you want to just go, and she said they will have planning and zoning input or whatever, so she'll say she talked to me and then she'll kind of open it up.
When was the meeting again?
The 28th, Thursday, the 28th. So next week, Thursday. You can check with Nancy. I mean, that would just be the easiest. I'm trying to keep track of more. The Energy Committee is Tuesday, the 26th. The DRB is a public hearing this Thursday. That's not really a meeting for regular discussion. But anyway, if there
we can reach out to them anyway. Just reach out to the chair. Who did you say the chair is now?
Conservation or DRB?
DRB.
DRB. Patrick.
Okay.
His name. Yeah, I talked to him once, and I can.
Bradley.
Patrick Bradley. Thank you.
All right. And I don't know if you, since you've already talked to him, do you want to just ask him if they want to?
I can do the DRB. If you could do, so it's Craig Lane is the conservation. I've talked to him, but if you can take conservation and historical, I'll take DRB and Peter Gregory.
Okay, conservation again, who's the?
Craig Lane. I can send you his.
Okay, Craig Lane.
And
then
just
ask them, and our meeting is scheduled then for this
October 17, Tuesday.
17. Zoom.
Yeah, I think Zoom for this especially, because we're gonna want to kind of make it as easy as possible for people to jump in and out.
And basically the subject matter is going to be addressing scenic inventory, or you said don't say.
Oh, I think inventory's a better word than roads.
Scenic.
Scenic
The draft is called Scenic Resources.
Okay. Yep. Resources. Yep. Good one. Thank you, Linda.
There we go.
Scenic,
I knew there's one of those words.
Resources. Excellent.
So we are revisiting. We're in the preliminary steps of revisiting the solar resources section of both the plan and the bylaws. Yep. And we're looking for input.
So it'd be nice if we can get, so it's on the website, and I'll make sure that both Nancy and Craig know, take a look at it and just be prepared to, have their input on scenic resources.
Yeah, well, we need to, and we'll get Ernie to do his homework. We need to do our homework on, here are the pieces of the bylaws and the pieces of the town plan and the two maps or whatever that relate to this topic. And we need to, pretty much know those backwards and forwards, so we can, because then we can go to the DRB will say, this thing here is totally ambiguous. And we need to know what they're pointing at when they say this thing. Oh yeah, I read that and it doesn't spell out what steep slopes are or what significant tree cover means, or all those kinds of things.
The only other thing, which I don't think is necessary, but if so just throw it out there. There may be a select board member who, this doesn't, it does affect them because they're still signing off on preferred site letters as well. So I know we have to go through it. It might be something that you just, if you want to put out a call to Marcia and just say,
we're doing this.
We are doing scenic resources. Is there anybody on the select board who would be interested in being involved in the conversation. That's
Well,
it.
at
They
the,
may or may not.
yeah, but I think you're right. I mean, to go back it up the whole way, they're gonna have to approve anything we do, so it's pretty
Exactly.
stupid, it's pretty stupid not to get them involved up front. And you know, at this point, what we're asking for is can somebody show up on the 17th
If they're interested.
and listen and say something if they want to. So we should certainly invite that. So it's certainly appropriate to, you know, send Marcia a note that says, this is what we're doing. You know, you can send us things in writing. You can send a representative officially, or just whoever feels like showing up can show up, but they should be aware of it.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I'll try to come up with making sense of what we were just talking about, but I mean, I think, and then the charter in its can go to the planning commission as part of our report.
Oh, yeah, excellent.
But I think the point is, what we just talked about was, you know, 20% or 10% of what's listed as possibly what we might do in our charter. And that's what we're looking for, is what's the first 10 or 20% to work on. Because otherwise we're just going to talk and not
Exactly.
do
Yeah.
anything.
I totally, yeah, no, I like the idea of having those targets, and I think that's great. Great first target.
Okay.
So
Okay.
recap, I got that. I know who to talk to. You know who you're going to talk to. October 17th, 6:30 Zoom.
Yeah.
And you're going to talk to Marcia, or give them the heads
I
up.
will, yeah, I will notify and invite that sort of thing, to say, here's what we're doing, and we would welcome and encourage any participation.
Okay, and then you're also going to add that. Wait a minute, didn't you just already send out the agenda for our next meeting or not? What did I just saw? I thought I saw.
No, that was a mistake. That's the land use subcommittee.
Oh,
Thursday.
Pam did send it.
And Debbie just put it as planning commission
Commission.
meeting, but it's a subcommittee meeting.
I was wondering. Okay, I'm glad
No,
she.
our packet will go out middle of next week, I think.
So if you're going to add that to the agenda, let them know that.
Yeah, it's not even, it's in 2 weeks. Yeah, PC packet has to go out on Wednesday the 4th.
Okay.
So we're fine.
Right.
So I think, and that's the point to these once a month. If we do once a month subcommittee, once a month planning commissions, and we can use them, like we can use the planning commission agenda and conversation to have some extra time to talk and get some publicity and then wrap around. And that's plenty, you know,
Yeah.
that's enough for
And
anybody
the listserv post is great. Just listen to the tape and copy it.
Yeah, we can go back and forth. We'd have to think about it. We can either make posts as individuals. If we want to draft a post from the subcommittee, then we have to have a warned meeting to finalize the draft.
I would suggest, Jan, that it should come from you as the chair of the planning commission, just because you're more identifiable than the subcommittee.
So if it's informational, then I have no trouble with that. It's just a short informational thing that says, planning commission is working on several topics. This is one of them. Here's what we're doing. Welcome participation. Here are some dates. Then yeah, that seems appropriate, and I don't feel for a warned meeting to discuss that.
Right, and the only reason I say it should come from you, as opposed to, you know, I think a lot of people probably, you know, look at Pam Mullen or Miranda Bergemeyer and just sort of ignore it for half, you know, there's so many of them. So that's why,
Right.
You know, if somehow you wrote your name, planning committee, somehow.
Yeah, it's just
somehow
planning
it's
commission activities, you know, planning commission activity, like Lily was doing about some town clerk stuff.
Right.
You know, here's some things going on in the planning commission you might want to know about. It's kind of newsy and informational.
Right.
Yeah.
Does anybody, Linda, Bob, Kathleen, anybody have any comments, anything? Before we close out? No comments?
Hi,
Oh, Bob,
thanks for all the good work. This is a big learning curve for me, but I appreciate hearing about it. Thanks.
Well, and I would encourage from the point of view of learning curve, part of what I was taking notes on was a list of questions. And so we clearly have about 10 of them that came up tonight that I'll try and list, and then hopefully find somebody to get answers. But same thing to anybody who's listening or anybody who reads the draft minutes and so forth. Send in questions. We should have a running list of questions.
Yeah.
And that's, so, Kathleen, if there's something to say, wait a minute, I don't even know what you're talking about with an enhanced energy plan. Can somebody give me a paragraph on what that means? Then when I talk to Peter Gregory and I get some information, then I'll put it somewhere to answer that question.
great idea.
I'll be reading what you send and thinking about it.
Okay, good, thank you.
Bob, did you say you're about to come on?
Your question? What was your question?
No, I thought you came on. I thought you had a comment. or
No.
something. Okay.
Yeah.
Enjoy your swim.
It's gonna be cold.
It looks pretty tropical.
That's true.
At
All
the
right,
time, it was 85.
If we were being formal, I'd move to adjourn, but I don't think we're being that formal.
Well, I think we maybe have to. Subcommittee, let's
All right,
stick
I'd
to
shoot
our
for
OML.
consensus to any objection to adjourning. All right. Good.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Good
Yeah.
night. Good night.
I'll get these out.
Thanks for doing the minutes.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
You bet. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.